Welcome back to Coloring Through the Bible. My name is Keegan Harkins, and today we are continuing on our study on the book of Ruth. This week we are looking at Ruth Chapter 2. Last week we did Chapter 1. Makes sense? Just like last week, there are free worksheets on the website, Hebrews 4 Ministries. If you click on my smiling little face on that home page, it'll take you to my page that has the free worksheets on it. So hopefully those will help you draw a little bit closer and looking at the scripture and looking at your own life and just help you to get even more out of God's word, which is the whole point. So we're going to be looking at Ruth chapter 2. We're going to be looking at how this chapter really talks about how God is providing a way. And that's really important for us. Sometimes we think when things get really bad that there's no way out. Or we think maybe God has abandoned us when we don't see his hand moving. And this chapter is a great reminder that when we don't even see what God is doing, he's putting everything in place. He doesn't look the other way just when things are hard. He's right there with us. He never promised us life was going to be easy, but he did promise us that he was always going to be with us, that he was never going to leave our side. And we see this so beautifully in Ruth chapter 2. So I want to just dig into it. Just like last week, we're going to kind of snip it up into little bite-sized pieces and look at it in little chunks. So the first section we're going to look at is just verses 1 through 3. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Abimelech, a man of standing whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Let me go into the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out and began to glean the fields behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she found herself working in the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Abimelech. Right here, Ruth is just saying, hey, we're hungry. We need some food. They have no income. They have no property. They have no way of making a living or buying food. But what they do have is a law that God set up for the Israelite people that said that when they were harvesting, they weren't allowed to go back and pick up what had been dropped. That was left there as a provision for people who were poor. It was kind of like the welfare system of ancient times. But anybody who needed food could go behind the harvesters, go along the sides of the road, and they could pick up barley, wheat, whatever that was being harvested, and eat it and make bread from it and do whatever they needed to do. Make it into bread and sell it in the marketplace, whatever they needed to do. It was left there as a way of providing for the disadvantaged or unfortunate people living in Israel. But I want to point out one thing. Not only is she being taken care of by God because it's harvest time, so they're poor, they have no food, and God's providing a way for them to have food. But it keeps pointing out that Ruth is a Moabitess, that she is a foreigner, but not just that she's a foreigner, that she's from Moab. And why that's important is because it wasn't just that she was from another country. Because there were a lot of, there was laws that God had given the Israelites that they were supposed to be kind to the aliens living in their land, that they were supposed to be kind to foreigners. But there's this special little tinge to the fact that she's a Moabitess. Israel and the country of Moab hated each other and fought wars against each other for centuries. And eventually, many years after Ruth's life, Israel would conquer the country of Moab and make it part of Israel. But this is a country that is more than just a foreign country. It's not an ally. It's not even somebody that is just different. It's somebody that Israel would remember fighting against. That they would go, you're not just a foreigner, you're my enemy. So that really puts her in a disadvantage. And yet she goes out saying, I'm just anybody who finds that I can find favor with. Anybody that's going to let this foreign woman from Moab come and pick up what's left by the harvesters. I'm going to find us something to eat, Mom, don't worry. And God leads her to the one field, to the one man who could change her life forever. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in providence. And this is a great sign that when we think, I'm just going to go out and try and find something to eat, God's like, I got something big planned for you. So even when we don't see that God's moving, he's still in control and he still has a plan for us. So let's keep going. Let's look at just verses 4 through 13. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. I love it. Just then. Ruth has already been working all day in this field. If Boaz had returned to the field a day earlier, he would have missed her. But he didn't. Again, this is God making the timing perfect. Because now when Boaz comes back and he goes, hey, I don't know who that girl is. Who is that girl? He asks his foreman, and his foreman replies in verse 6, she is the Moabitess, again, making that distinction. She's from Moab. But he keeps going. He says, who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning until now, except for a short rest in the shelter. If Boaz had come at a different time, Ruth wouldn't have proven herself. Ruth did more than just go behind and pick up what she needed. You know, she did more than just go up and pick up a few grains and go back home and go, well, I got something for us to make dinner. She worked all day. She didn't just get what they needed for dinner that night. She was harvesting. She was banking up for the future. More than they needed for today. Enough for tomorrow. Enough for the next day. She was working hard. And her diligence, her commitment. She already had the good reputation that she came back with Naomi. I mean, that would have been a strange thing. Why didn't she go home like Orpah? You know, we already have that commitment to Naomi. But now she is working really hard. And that impresses Boaz. So he tells her, you know, stay close to my girls, the girls that are hired to work for him. Stay close to them. Don't wander off behind. There were a lot of dangers. Not only the fact that she was a single woman, young, a foreigner, a Moab. You know, there were a lot of dangers that could have happened just with other people, from her being alone in a field way behind everybody else. But there were a lot of dangers with animals. You know, I mean, she could easily have been taken down by a predator as she's bending over, picking up things, and not paying attention. And Boaz is saying, you know, hang out with me, get closer to my girls. Hang out with them. There's men right there who are guarding the girls. They'll guard you too. You know, you have my protection, which I love. I love how God is providing for her, and he provides for us, and I love that. Sometimes we don't think that God sees what we're doing. Sometimes we don't think that people see how we're working so hard. Do you ever do that? Do you ever work really hard at something and you pour yourself out into it and you don't think anybody notices? Well, this chapter really points out, one, God notices, and so he provides for us. But other people do notice. When we think our good works are going unnoticed, they're not. So we shouldn't worry so much that, you know, nobody's seeing that I'm doing really good. We need to keep working hard, being diligent, even if at the moment we don't see the results, there's always something working. God's providing a way for us, and our hard work and diligence is going to pay out in the end. So keep working hard. Keep going forward towards what God has called you to do, because in the end, we're going to see that God blesses the people who are diligent in their service for him. He blesses us over and abundantly, more than we ever could even imagine. So let's go on. Let's go on to the next section of verses 14 through 18. So in verse 14, at mealtime, so not only does she have the provision of working close to the other people, but now it's dinner time. Now you wouldn't go to this poor person who's just gathering, you know, it's not stealing because it's part of the law that they have to let them pick it up. But you know, you can kind of think that this is my field, not your field. You wouldn't feed them too, but that's exactly what Boaz does. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread, dip it in the wine vinegar. And when she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. And as she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men to help her out, to make sure that she's getting enough, that she's getting even more than she wanted. So she continues to work, and it says that she continues to work until evening. So she has worked sun up to sundown, and God has provided for her more food than she could even eat. So then so the day is over. She goes home, and so she, it says in verse 18, she carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. And I wanted to point that out because this really speaks a lot to commitment and diligence. It's not enough that we just do the bare minimum requirement of what we're supposed to do. We should be working our best at whatever we do. That's what Ruth did. She didn't just get some. She got so much that Ruth was really surprised. She didn't just work for a little bit. She worked sun up to sundown. She didn't just eat all of what she wanted to eat and then leave the rest to be thrown to the dogs or whatever they did back then, you know, with the leftover food. She brought it home to Naomi. She went above and beyond what was expected or required, and that's a real inspiration to us. Are we going above and beyond in what we can do? Are we not only working hard, but as we're working hard, are we thinking about others we can bless with our surplus that God gives us? Sometimes when we're in that situation, you know, when maybe finances are tight, but then God blesses us and we're making it through and we have a little bit left over, we think, well, we need to hide this up because, you know, it's not going to, maybe not going to be so long until we're going to need it. Things happen. But are we looking for ways that we can bless other people, even if our surplus is little? Because remember, God says, if you're faithful in the little things, then He'll give us more. So I just think that this is such a great encouragement for us as we're reading the book of Ruth, to work hard, to be diligent, but while we're working hard, while we're trying to do the best that we can, keep our eyes open for ways that we can be a blessing to other people. All right, moving on, because I know this is getting kind of long. Sorry, guys. All right, turn to the last section I want to look at is verses 19 through 23. This is the turn of Naomi's heart. Naomi saw herself as being bitter. You know, don't call me Naomi, which means pleasant. Call me Mara, because it's bitter. And now we see that she is starting, like her eyes are open, and she's starting to see that even though she's at this really bad place, God is still lavishing her with love. Because she asks her daughter-in-law, she says, Ruth, where did you go that you were so blessed to be able to work from sunup to sundown, that you got so much more than I even expected, plus food? Where did you go? And when Ruth says, well, I was at the field of Boaz, Naomi just freaks out because she realizes God has provided again. Because there are very few people like Boaz there. I mean, Ruth could have gone to any other field and it would have been a completely different story. What was so important about the fact that Boaz owned the field and Boaz was from Naomi's husband's family was that made him her kinsman redeemer, which is something we don't have anymore. But basically, in order to keep the land of Israel in the land of Israel, you know, they didn't want you to sell off your land to somebody from another tribe. They didn't want you to sell off your land to a foreigner. So they started this thing called a kinsman redeemer. If you were in debt and you had to sell off all of your property because you had no money or you had debts, a kinsman redeemer was somebody in your family who would step up and buy back your field, your home, and then give it to you. They'd basically step up and pay off your debts. If you had to sell yourself into slavery, they would buy you back and set you free. It's basically just somebody that says, hey, you had a rough time or you made some bad choices, and I'm going to step in and I'm going to pay the price for your mistakes. Kind of a precursor to Jesus to help us understand what Jesus did. God enacted this kinsman redeemer as something to prepare us for what Jesus would do. So Boaz is one of these kinsmen. He could redeem their life. He could, give them back everything that they had lost. And Naomi is starting to see that not only has God provided a way, but he's going to give her back everything she thought she had lost. And I love that image. I love that image that when we trust God, he never says our life is going to be easy, but he always says that he loves us. And just because we're going through something really, really hard doesn't mean that it's going to be really, really hard forever. And if you look at the life of Job, Job lost everything. All of his children died, all of his property destroyed, his wife lost respect for him, his friends lost respect for him, he lost his health, he lost everything. But I love the very last verse of the book of Job. It says that God blessed him more in the last years of his life than he had in the first years of his life. That after that pain and suffering, God blessed him, gave him more than he had before. And this is what Naomi is seeing, that just because we go through hard things doesn't mean it's over. When we continue to trust God, he's going to bring us through this hard time. There was a purpose for this hard time. Ruth and Naomi had to go through this hard time because God has a purpose for it. And we're going to see that Ruth and Naomi and Boaz are all ancestors of Jesus. God brought them together because this was the family line that he wanted to have for his son. So sometimes we go through hard times just like Ruth and Naomi, and they're not pleasant and they're hard and they require diligent work to keep on going. But God provides in the trial, and he provides a way out of the trial, and he provides for a future after it's over. So I hope that you guys can be encouraged by this chapter in the book of Ruth to look at God no matter what you're going through. He's right with you. He hasn't turned his back, and he's got a plan for even this. I love you guys. I'd encourage you to read all of Ruth chapter 2. I know we only kind of hit some highlights. Go back and read all of chapter 2. Go to the website, get the free worksheets, take a little bit digger deep into it. Thank you for spending time with me today. Have a truly blessed week.